Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting back into more talk about Absolute Carnage, to where at this point, with revisiting Venom, we get a bit of clarity in hindsight on one of Dylan's newly found powers, but also a bit of clarity on the whole situation on what happened with the Maker. So with no further ado, let's get into it. Well, actually one further ado, because if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so as I mentioned before, like looking back and honing in on this one particular point in time that starts back when the Maker had been taken over by the hybrid symbiote, or symbiotes plural, with the four combining and converting the Maker into the latest version of the hybrid symbiote, and it's starting from this point in time and reaching really all the way through to the later point, which we also talked about, where everyone meets back up at Rex's safe house so that Bruce Banner can use the Maker's machine to extract the codices from Captain America, the Thing, Hawkeye, and Wolverine. And it's really like in between that window where I want to focus on for this whole discussion. Because prior to this point, like we had seen, when the Maker had became hybrid and he came after Dylan and Normie, it was then that we both got the mention from the Maker that Dylan was different, that we'd also had teased before. But in addition to that, we had also got the beginning of his powers manifesting in his attempt to protect Normie and himself, which back at the time was very brief, with us really just getting to see how it looked versus knowing like what the power actually was. And mainly because at this point in time, Spider-Man had came back with the heroes from Carnage USA, and when they seen the kids were in trouble, they immediately jumped in, and at that point Dylan and Normie just got up out of there. Which really makes sense because at this point in time, Dylan really doesn't know what he is, let alone what his powers are, and even less so how to use them. But what this essentially leads us to, as the two of them flee the scene and make their way back into the safe house to get Sleeper and release him from his container, because once again his container was like the only one that didn't break. But when they return back to get Sleeper, this is when Dylan noticed one of his powers, because at this time with Sleeper not having a host and not being able to literally talk, Dylan immediately noticed that he could read Sleeper's mind. So with doing this and Sleeper telling Dylan that we gotta get out there, we gotta help, with Carnage needing to be stopped and Eddie needing all the help he can get at this point, Sleeper more or less just told Dylan that we gotta bond and just get out there. And so now with doing so, Sleeper also gets a deeper look at what Dylan is and a much closer look at what he's potentially capable of in the beginning stages of this bonding process. And immediately when this happens, for Sleeper, this is like nothing he's experienced before, which for starters is insane, and we'll get back to why in just a second. But in the initial bonding stages, Dylan's eyes go dark again, and he starts speaking that ancient language like Knull, and immediately Sleeper's like, bump this, like he wants no parts of that. And Sleeper is literally terrified, and he immediately jumps off of Dylan. And with doing so, one, Sleeper's like, okay, first of all, what are you? But in addition to that, he also expresses that he's never felt anything like that before. And so now here's the reason why, like, that is nothing light to just brush over. Because when we talked about that course in time when Sleeper had left Earth, which overall was for a number of years, but through the latter portion of that time, Sleeper had met Knull. And this wasn't like your pleasant dap it up, holla at me when you get your codices up type of situation. But rather, one, Sleeper was being called by Knull, and after following this call to its source, which had brought him to Clintar, to where upon his arrival, Knull also tried to hold Sleeper, but within that brief connection, Sleeper had also seen the face of Knull, but also had briefly seen his power, to where before being completely imprisoned, Sleeper had to break away, blast off, and just get up out of there. But with doing so, this established Sleeper getting a look at Knull and the power that he's capable of from being called to Clintar all the way to his direct encounter. And even after having this experience, he still expresses that he has never felt anything like Dylan, which for the two of them is surprising yet terrifying at the same time. But while this is going on and the rest of the heroes are still fighting with the Maker, to where at this point much of their efforts are leaving them at a bit of a standoff, and very much to the point where the Maker tells them like, you guys just don't have what it takes to stop him, and they really don't know what they're up against. But moments after, when Dylan and Sleeper step into the fight, and at this point, though they haven't bonded together, Dylan has taken over the mind of Sleeper. He's commanded him to become a wolf in order to attack the Maker, but Dylan is fully in control. And with doing so, he orders Sleeper to attack the Maker, and not even so much to like bite him or maw at him or anything, but because he knows that Sleeper can produce any chemical substance, he makes him cover the Maker with napalm, which for the record, if anybody doesn't know what it is highly flammable, so don't try this at home. But with Dylan ordering Sleeper to cover the Maker with napalm, to where at that point Hawkeye's just like, okay, wait, that's flammable. So he then hits the Maker with a lit arrow and lights him up. which didn't kill him, but it definitely took him out of the fight, because not long after this had happened, the Maker more or less decided that he didn't want to be bonfire entertainment, so he burrowed his way out and got away. But with Dylan doing this, nobody else really knew that Sleeper was under the control of Dylan. And if anyone else here was close to even knowing, that one person would likely be the Maker who got up out of there. Because if Dylan, who at this point is actually exercising a portion of his power to control Sleeper, then what's to stop him moments after that from just waving his hand and telling the hybrid symbiote to stand down? Because remember, Dylan's just pretty much feeling his way through, and he's just now discovering what he's capable of. To where at this point in time, as far as abilities, it seems that he just has two, though I would beg to differ. Not only can they work on a larger scale, but also these two abilities, with him being able to read the mind of symbiotes and also control them, that these two abilities are barely scratching the surface. And so now, not long after this, and through the course of like a few hours, which also sews together the events between Absolute Carnage, Venom, and the Immortal Hulk, like in between this few hour gap, Spider-Man then runs into Bruce Banner. They have their conversation like we talked about earlier on the playlist, which eventually leads to Banner meeting back with everyone else at Rex's safe house, to where at this point Banner has figured out how to reconfigure the machine, which prior to this point caused much discomfort in the process of extracting codices. But Banner had figured out how to still make this machine work and still extract the codices without causing that discomfort, which is something that I gotta say, like I wouldn't even doubt that the Maker could have done this himself. Like he could have bypassed the discomfort and still made this machine capable of collecting codices without simultaneously being a torture machine. But I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that not only could he do it, but he didn't want to. But with Banner figuring this out, they then begin to use the machine on Normie and the other heroes, and in the meantime we get a bit of a closer look at a conversation between Dylan and Sleeper. And immediately we get the feedback from Sleeper, like he didn't appreciate that, though he did want them to engage and help, but being controlled and flat out used like a puppet, that wasn't necessarily the form of execution that Sleeper had in mind. And Sleeper, like, he politely asked like, hey, just don't do that again, like, you know, I'd appreciate it. And I don't blame him, because he came to Dylan with the whole notion of like, hey, let's team up, and Dylan's actions really just responded like, work together, sure, but I control everything. Which, you know, is the type of behavior that can be taken the wrong way sometimes. But for Dylan, he expresses that, you know, it just felt like an instinct, like it was a part of him. And even further, like when Sleeper asks him like why did he choose him to become a wolf, Dylan responds that he's not really a dog person, but it was really more to the response of him seeing Eddie with the Venom symbiote, who was recently in a dog form. So for Dylan, it was just one of the first things that came to mind. And with them needing to take action and Dylan not really having the time to just think of different ideas, it just popped in his head and he went with it. And so because of this, Sleeper willingly turns into the appearance of a cat, which really shows that he still wants to make progress with Dylan, because after all, they're still family. And speaking of family, while they're still here at Rex's safe house, they're met with the soon arrival of Eddie Brock, who hasn't seen Dylan since he had left with Peter to go get Norman Osborn, which gives them both a moment of relief in the middle of all this chaos. But here's the thing, like now that we know more information about what's been going on between the lines, and prior to this point, we've already known the secret that Eddie has been keeping from Dylan, with him truly being Dylan's father, even though he's allowed Dylan to continually believe that he's just his brother. But even up until now, Eddie hasn't worked up the nerve to tell Dylan the truth. But also now, in the case of Dylan, he also has some things that he needs to figure out himself. And in this moment, though he's happy to see Eddie again, he's also struggling with the conflict of being transparent with Eddie and telling him everything that's going on. So now it's like the two of them both have their own secrets in which they're keeping from one another, when really they would just be better off if they just told each other the truth. But of course, following this, we then get the arrival of Carnage and the Venom symbiote leaving Eddie for Bruce Banner, and the whole subconscious approval process which we talked about that the Venom symbiote had to go through just to use Banner's body. And I got a link in the description to the playlist where we talked about this, which once again was well executed, with the Immortal Hulk tie-in slowing down that process and showing us how it went down, when in reality that whole thing took place at the speed of thought, to where like as the reader it may have felt like 10 or 15 minutes, but in real time at Rex's safe house it happened in a matter of seconds. But on top of that, and like fast forwarding through the events that had taken place, where we had seen Eddie take the other codices and go after Carnage, like even at this point Eddie and Dylan still haven't sorted out their issues. And really, like in my opinion, much of that just boils down to them getting in their own way, because if either one of them had just opened up and told each other the truth, they would then be able to realize like what great advantage they have in the middle of all this chaos. But that also is just the thing, like with so much happening so fast, there really isn't that time for either one of them to just stop and say, okay, you know what, let's stop, slow this down, let's have a talk. No, there isn't time, because Carnage is ripping out spines left and right, and now that's even escalated to the point to where Carnage has the codices that he needs to release Knull from his prison. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Like, what do you think of the first 2 abilities which we discovered that Dylan has? But also, I'm curious to know, like, what do you guys think, like, what else can Dylan do? Because essentially he's a mixed bag. He's part symbiote, part host, and the codex which was passed down from his mother, it's not like something that's separable from him. It's literally mixed up into every fiber of his being. So let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.